The alleged metallic door of the examination chamber slid open with a hiss, and the alien Dr. Calrex stood tall with his greenish, translucent skin gleaming under the clinical lights. His long fingers tapped a datapad as his large black eyes scanned the figure entering the room. It was a human soldier, a tall man with rough features and a calm expression, dressed in the gray uniform of Earth's interstellar command. "Sit down, human," Calrex said with a voice that clicked and hissed like static from an old machine. The soldier, named Mason Briggs, gave a nod and sat silently on the diagnostic platform. Calrex circled him with a look of amused curiosity. "Your species still uses bone marrow to produce blood. How primitive," Calrex muttered, loudly enough for the alien nurses nearby to giggle. His voice echoed through the room as his tentacle-like arm extended with a medical probe. Mason didn't react. He sat straight, his hands resting on his knees, his breathing even calm, focused. Probe drew a small vial of blood from Mason's arm, and Calrex held it up to the light with visible disdain. He dropped it into a scanner that immediately began humming. "What is it with humans and their constant weakness? Your muscles tear your bones, break your brains, leak chemicals to manage emotions," Calrex said, turning toward the others in the room, who laughed politely. His words were sharp, mocking, designed to remind everyone in the room of alien superiority. Mason stayed quiet, not a single twitch crossed his face. He had been through worse than words, and he knew something the doctor did not. The scanner beeped, and Calrex glanced lazily at the screen, but then something in his expression changed. His head tilted slightly, and the clicking of his claws stopped. He leaned closer, his wide black eyes narrowing as he studied the readings again. He tapped the panel and rerun the analysis. The results flashed again, unchanged. His skin flushed darker, a sign of confusion in his species. "One moment," he said stiffly, stepping toward the machine and adjusting the parameters. He rerun the sample, this time pulling deeper cellular data. The screen blinked rapidly, then froze with a red warning banner across it. Calrex's fingers froze. He stared at the screen with disbelief. The room had fallen silent. Even the nurses sensed something had changed. The human soldier Mason finally spoke softly. "Is there a problem?" Dr. Calrex didn't respond immediately. His mind raced. He double-checked the DNA sequence, then the protein strands, then the mitochondrial regeneration markers. Each scan returned the same conclusion. "This cannot be right," Calrex whispered, more to himself than anyone else. He snatched the vial and ran it to another terminal. The secondary machine confirmed the exact same impossible result. He turned sharply to Mason. "Tell me, were you modified?" Mason simply stared at him for a long moment and said, "What do you think?" Calrex's mind reeled. The human's blood showed something impossible even among advanced species. His regenerative markers were beyond anything he had seen. The white blood cells were not only repairing but rewriting damage in real time. The DNA sequence carried dormant instructions that could activate under trauma and rebuild entire muscle groups, even small organ tissue. This was not natural. This was engineered. But the design was so elegant, so subtle, that it mimicked evolution itself. It was as if nature had been guided by an invisible hand toward perfection. Calrex waved the nurses out and locked the chamber with a hiss. He stared at Mason, as if seeing him for the first time. "How long have you been like this?" Calrex asked. Mason replied, "I don't keep track anymore." Calrex's mind was spinning. He couldn't believe he had laughed at this species, mocked it, degraded it, right in front of a being that held genetic secrets that could alter the future of life itself. He pulled up the interstellar medical database and ran the data against known galactic species, none matched, not even close. He leaned back from the screen, breathing heavily, his long fingers trembling slightly. "You are not just a soldier," Calrex said slowly. Mason looked at him, his eyes calm and still, and said, "No, I'm something else." The scanner behind them beeped again, this time triggering a lock on classified data files. Calrex's access was denied. Red letters scrolled across the screen. "Access restricted, EarthGov Level 7. Clearance required." Calrex had never seen human data blocked at that level before. Even the Galactic Council's inner files were less protected than this. He reached for his personal terminal, and ran a deep diagnostic trace. It pulled up one line, one project, one hidden file buried under hundreds of decoys. The name blinked once across the screen in bold white text: Project Lazarus. Galactic felt his heart freeze as he stared at that word. Something ancient, something dangerous, something the humans had buried and hidden with more care than their own planetary defense systems, and the blood sample in his hand was the key he looked at. Mason again, this time with something that felt dangerously close to fear. And Mason finally stood, adjusted his jacket, and said, "You might want to run that test." Again, Doc, this time dig deeper. Then he walked toward the exit without waiting for permission. Galactic didn't stop him. His hands were frozen above the console, his eyes still staring at the word Lazarus, blinking slowly like the heartbeat of something about to wake up. And for the first time in his life, Galactic didn't laugh at human biology. Strange discovery. Alien doctor laughed at human biology. Until the test results came back. Best HFY stories. The room was quiet after Mason left, but inside Dr. Galactic's mind a storm was building. Each thought clashed with the next. The screen before him still showed the same blinking warning: Project Lazarus restricted by EarthGov Level 7 clearance. And despite all his years of medical study, all his pride, all his arrogance, Galactic now realized he had stared at something far beyond anything he had ever encountered. He moved quickly to the rear lab chamber, shutting all external signals with a security seal. The walls pulsed with a low energy field to prevent data leaks. Galactic placed the blood vial into a molecular analyzer, a device so sensitive it could map atomic fluctuations within living samples. He activated the deep scan and leaned in close, his long fingers tightening around the panel as if afraid the machine would scream. Lines of genetic code began to pour down the screen at a speed too fast for most species to track. But Galactic read every sequence, every folding protein, every anomaly, and what he saw made the base of his throat pulse. There was something inside the blood, something ancient and beautiful, a hidden thread woven through the helix like a shadow, guiding its shape. The regenerative markers were only the surface beneath them. He found a complex web of encoded instruction sequences that had no origin in known evolutionary development. It was not just modified, it was something new. He ran the analysis again, this time layering in thermal resistance, muscular contraction speed, neural recovery rate, and synaptic response time, each one tested beyond the upper bounds of any known species, including his own. His claws tapped faster and faster, rerunning tests, adjusting baselines, shifting parameters, yet the results refused to change. Human soldier was not normal, and Galactic had mocked him. He sat back in the chair, his breathing uneven, and finally activated the encrypted console link to his assistant. "Come now, bring portable scanner and a blank genetic reference slate." Minutes later, his assistant Lorith arrived, eyes curious and posture stiff. Sensing the tension, "Doctor, what is it?" she asked softly. Galactic handed her a datapad and said, "Scan this again, verify every number, then tell me if I have gone insane." She took the pad and began scanning, her tentacles tightening as she worked the data. Was real. The readings confirmed Mason's blood carried traits of rapid cellular repair, neural memory stabilization, and dormant evolutionary triggers that could reactivate upon death, trauma, or extreme stress. "This should not be possible," she whispered, her eyes wide. Galactic leaned forward, his voice a harsh whisper. "I ran the sample against every known species in the Galactic Registry. Nothing matches, not even in theory. And this Project Lazarus, it is locked behind Earth's highest level clearance. Something so classified they buried it under decoys and digital traps. And now I know why." He paused, then asked, "Do you remember the war they fought with themselves before joining the Council, the one that nearly ended their species?" "Yes," Lorith replied. "The war that broke continents." Galactic nodded slowly. "What if they did not just survive it? What if they changed during it? What if humans turned that war into an experiment?" Lorith looked disturbed. "That would mean Mason is not just a soldier, he is a weapon." Galactic said, his voice low. They both turned to the console again, and Galactic reached for his override codes. Bypassing interspecies privacy laws with a shaky hand, he knew he was crossing a line, but his curiosity had turned to fear. He needed to know. He opened the raw genome feed and began unraveling the deep layers of the sample behind the standard DNA structure. Was something else. A second strand curled alongside it, faint, glowing, and partially encrypted, like it had been hidden, waiting for the right eyes. The moment he tried to isolate it, the entire screen flashed red, the lab lights flickered, and a message burned across the monitor. Unauthorized access detected. Report filed with EarthGov security grid tracking. Initiate Alex's. Blood ran cold. They were watching him. They had been watching the moment he tried to dig deeper. They responded faster than any council system. Lorith stepped back, frightened. What did you do? I did what any doctor would do, Calrex said. I looked for the truth, and now the truth is looking back. His console suddenly pinged a new alert. A direct message from Earth's embassy ship docked nearby. It contained only 4 words: do not pursue this. Calrex stared at those words, feeling the weight behind them. They know, he said. Earth knows we found it, and they warned us once, only once. But what is it really? Lorith asked. What is this, Lazarus? What is Heckelrex? Turned back to the sample, his eyes no longer mocking, no longer superior, only full of something ancient, something that alien doctors rarely felt respect. I do not know yet, he answered, but I intend to find out. And, as they stood in silence, the blood in the vial shimmered faintly, as if it too was aware that someone was watching and waiting. Far beyond the lab, hidden behind encrypted star networks, a human server blinked to life, recording the unauthorized access, and a human figure in a dark room. Read the file. Lazarus prototype exposed. Activate watch list. Forbidden truth. Calrex paced inside his private quarters, his long arms folded tight against his narrow chest, while shadows from the dim blue ceiling light danced across the walls. His mind spun faster than the calculations. Flashing across his screen, the warning from Earth had arrived just hours ago, but it had not deterred him. Instead, it had fed a growing fire deep inside him. Had never been a man to obey without question. Curiosity was his curse, and now that he had seen what lay beneath the skin of the human soldier, he could not ignore it. He had mocked them, once called their biology weak, simple, crude, but that blood had shown him something no data report ever had, something raw and terrifying. He activated a secured link into the Galactic network, then rerouted it through 6 dead satellites abandoned by mining guilds to hide his trace. The penalty for unauthorized access to restricted military files was exile at best, but still he pressed on. He was no longer chasing information, he was chasing revelation. The file, named Project Lazarus, appeared again. This time, he tried a different approach. Instead of breaching it head-on, he wrapped his signal in the coding language of Earth's obsolete medical drones, a language so old, most systems ignored it, but humans were known to bury secrets in the most unexpected places. The screen flickered, and the file opened. Edcorrex felt his heart stall as lines of classified reports flowed down his console. Internal communications, video logs, genetic tests, each labeled with red tags, all marked high risk, high security, do not distribute. He opened the first log, and a human general in black uniform appeared behind a steel desk. His voice was grim. If this project fails, we lose the war. If it succeeds, we may lose our humanity. Either way, it must be done. Calrex skipped ahead and found raw footage of human soldiers running through live fire simulations. One man took a plasma shot directly to the chest, fell, and did not move for 20 seconds, then stood again, his wound closing before the camera could focus. In the next log, a group of human doctors spoke to the camera in low voices. One said, "We built it from the base of human adaptability and pain resistance. We pushed the immune system beyond natural limits, then taught the body to learn from death." Another doctor whispered, "We call it synthetic reincarnation. We made the body fear nothing, not pain, not death, not even cellular rot. Every time they break, they rebuild stronger." Calrex felt his breath grow shallow. The implications were horrifying and brilliant. Project Lazarus was not just an experiment. It was a transformation. It turned men into creatures who Learned from dying and grew from pain. He finally opened the last report and saw a list of active subjects, almost all listed as deceased, except one subject, 07 status active, name Mason Briggs, location Joint Galactic, medical station. Calrex's fingers froze. He stared at the screen for a long moment. Mason was not just a prototype, he was the last living result of a forgotten war. The door behind Calrex hissed open, and Lorith stepped inside, her face pale, her eyes sharp. "No," she said, her voice trembling. "EarthGov has blocked your credentials across the entire council mesh. They sent a signal to the station captain. You are being watched." Calrex didn't turn. He simply muttered, "I saw it all." Lorith, it was not just enhancement, it was evolution. They turned death into data and pain into progress. They buried a god in the body of a soldier. And we laughed at it. Lorith stepped closer, lowering her voice. "You need to report this to the council. They must know what humans are capable of." Calrex turned sharply and said, "Do you really believe the council wants to know the truth, or do you think they prefer the illusion of superiority we have clung to for centuries? If they learn humans cracked biological immortality through regeneration, they will not praise them. They will fear them, and then they will try to eliminate them." The room fell silent. Outside the station, a communication drone launched. Quietly, it carried a fragment of Calrex's access trail and headed toward the outer ring of the council's intelligence hub. Calrex moved quickly. He backed up all the files onto a hidden crystal drive, then erased every trace from his console. But he knew it was not enough. Too many eyes had already seen. Too many signals had already been tripped. He turned to Lorith and said, "Find Mason. Tell him what I found. Tell him they will come for him, not because of what he is, but because of what he represents." Lorith nodded and left without another word, her steps quick and heavy. Calrex sat alone in the dark, his hands resting on the drive, his mind playing through every word, every warning, every image. The humans had hidden their evolution inside the shell of weakness and let the galaxy mock them, and now the mask was cracking above him, in orbit. EarthGov command satellites picked up the signal echo from his unauthorized file access. A silent alert was triggered and sent across encrypted channels. Subject 7 compromised. Prepare containment response. Down on the station, Mason Briggs stood alone in the cargo bay, watching stars flicker beyond the reinforced glass, his hand clenched slowly as if something inside him already knew the time had come to stop hiding. The truth was no longer buried. Trial of Terra-Ute, the Grand Council chamber, hovered like a glass heart suspended in space, its walls transparent, revealing stars that shimmered like distant watchers. Across the void within its curved shell sat representatives of 12 major species, their robes flowing, their symbols glowing faintly across their chest plates. All focused on the center where 2 figures stood, one human and one alien. Mason Briggs stood still in his dark uniform, hands behind his back, shoulders squared, his face unreadable. Beside him stood Calrex, who now looked nothing like the proud, mocking doctor he once had been. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a tension that lived in his posture, in the stiffness of his limbs, and the flicker of worry in his deep black eyes. The high arbiter of the council, a crystalline being known as Selrun, with a voice like singing ice, echoed through the chamber. "Dr. Calrex, you stand here under accusation of breaching Level 7 clearance codes, violating interspecies trust agreements, and exposing genetic data from an allied race. How do you plead?" Calrex bowed his head slowly and said, "I plead guilty with justification." Gasps whispered through the hall, though none dared speak above. The arbiter Selyan tilted its head, the crystal veins pulsing, then asked, "State your justification." Calrex stepped forward, lifting a crystal tablet, and said, "I did not act out of rebellion, but out of necessity. What I found cannot be ignored. I request the council view these findings before judgment." A murmur of dissent rose, but Selrun silenced it with a wave. The chamber darkened, and the center lit with a projection. Mason's medical scans appeared first, showing cellular activity beyond known regeneration metrics, followed by DNA breakdowns, revealing layered evolutionary traits designed to activate under trauma. Then came the footage from Project Lazarus field tests. Bodies healing organs, reknitting men rising after fatal wounds, the final clip showed. Mason walking through a hail of plasma fire, untouched, his body absorbing and adapting with unnatural speed. Silence followed. The council stared, the images still burning into their minds. Many of them had once believed humans were mere survivors, frail, quick to bleed, quick to die. But now they saw something else, something ancient and terrifying. One counselor, a scaled being from the Talish Dominion, hissed loudly, "This cannot be allowed. This kind of evolution threatens the balance of life." Another, from the crystalline Miktari, added, "If humans can recover from death, what need will they have for alliances or peace?" Rex turned to them, his voice rising sharply. "Is this what we have become? We fear knowledge. We fear strength, and so we choose ignorance. Do you think Earth is a threat because of what they are, or because we failed to understand them?" Sorune's light pulsed in silence, then turned to Mason. "Mason Briggs, do you confirm these findings, and were you aware of what you carried?" Mason met Selruin's gaze and said, "I was aware, and I never used it against anyone, but I will not apologize for what we are." "And what are you?" asked a counselor. Mason replied, "We are not immortal, we are not gods, we are something you do not understand, because you never had to crawl from extinction. We had no starfleets, no great archives, we had only war, famine, plague and fire, and through it all we did not break, we adapted, we survived." He took a slow breath, then said, "We never asked for Project Lazarus. We did not choose to be rebuilt from our pain, but once it was done, we chose to bury it because we knew you would not see a miracle, you would see a threat." A long silence followed. No one moved, no one spoke. Then Selrune said, "The council must now vote. Calrex, you may return to your chamber. Mason, you are ordered to remain aboard until further notice." As Mason and Calrex walked out, a shadow moved behind the upper court seating. A cloaked figure whispered into a device, "The prototype speaks, he knows too much. Begin preparation for immediate containment." Hours passed. Calrex sat alone in his chamber, his hand shaking as he poured a cup of steaming red liquid. He had seen the shift in the council, their eyes, their postures. They were afraid not just of Mason, but of what Mason meant. He looked up as Lorith entered, her face tight with urgency. "They plan to move tonight," she whispered. "A black team from the inner guard. No insignia, no authorization." Calc stood slowly, then asked, "Where is Mason?" "Cargo deck, prepping for departure." Without another word, Calrex moved fast, his coat flowing behind him. As he ran through the corridors, he reached the deck and found Mason loading a civilian shuttle with supplies. "They're coming for you," Calrex said. "No trial, no vote. They're afraid, and they want this over." Mason looked at him with a calm expression, then closed the cargo door slowly. "I expected this." Calrex stared at him. "You knew?" Mason replied, "I knew the moment I let you see the blood. This was always the risk." Calrex reached into his pocket and handed over the data crystal. "Keep this, it proves everything. Use it only if they try to erase you." Mason took it and nodded. Alarms suddenly echoed through the station. Lights flashed, red voices shouted over, "Comes containment team, breach in progress." Pulled Mason into the shadows and said, "Then run now." And they did. Behind them, armed black-suited figures descended like wraiths, their weapons silent, their orders final. But they were too late. The Lazarus prototype was already gone. SECR reeked war. PLANS. The civilian shuttle sliced through the black ocean of space, leaving behind the chaos of the council station and the squad that had arrived too late to contain the target. Inside the dim interior, Mason Briggs sat in silence, his body calm, but his mind racing. The crystal drive from Calrex was secured in a hidden compartment near the nav system, its value greater than any ship or weapon. He knew it was only a matter of time before the council deployed more than containment teams. They would shift to discrediting, to silencing, to eliminating not just him, but the legacy of Project Lazarus itself. Because if the galaxy knew what humans had become, the balance of power would fracture, and those who mocked humanity would have to kneel. "Come." Link crackled and a voice filtered through, low, encrypted, and familiar. "This is Commander Rhodes. You have gone off grid." "Mason, this wasn't part of the plan," Mason replied calmly. "The plan changed the moment the doctor showed the council my blood." There was a pause, then Rhodes said, uploading new coordinates. Fallback site Omega 9. You are not alone out there. Remember that. Mason locked in the new route and stared out at the stars as the ship curved through the void, heading toward a place even the Council dared not monitor. Meanwhile, back at the station, Calrex stood in the Council corridor, surrounded by shadows. His credentials revoked, his access frozen. He had become a traitor to the system for revealing the truth, and yet he felt no regret, only fear for what was coming. Glorith appeared beside him, whispering in a hurried voice, "They have issued a universal alert. They say Mason has been infected with a genetic virus, a threat to all species. They want him executed, not captured." Clenched his jaw, his fingers twitching. They always choose fear. He turned and walked away, heading for the old medical bay, abandoned after the purge of non-compliant research projects there. He activated a hidden console, one that only former heads of xenogenetics had access to. The system booted slowly, its glow casting pale light across the dust. Uploaded one file, only one, labeled Subject Omega Project Phoenix. Calrex knew this was his final card, a record of every suppressed human experiment, every Council attempt to block or replicate Earth's progress, and proof that humanity had not just survived evolution, they had bent it across the galaxy. In Omega 9, a dark moon shrouded in ancient debris, Mason's shuttle landed quietly, lights off, systems cold. The base. There had no official record, no visitors, no surveillance, because it had been built before the Council ever knew humanity existed inside the bunker. Commander Rhodes, a woman with sharp eyes and a scar across her cheek, greeted Mason with a nod. They did not shake hands. They did not speak of the past, only of what needed to be done. "The Council will not stop," Rhodes said, her voice cold and focused. "We activated the hidden fleet just beyond Sector Delta's rim. They think Earth is undefended, but we planned for this." Mason placed the crystal drive on the table and said, "This has all the data. Calrex gave me enough to expose them or destroy them. Your choice." Rhodes studied the drive, then said, "They want a war. They will get one, but not the kind they expect." She turned to a control panel and entered a sequence. The floor beneath them rumbled as panels lifted and revealed rows of sleeping pods, inside each a human soldier. Enhanced, modified, prepared project. Lazarus was not a single man, it was a seed. Rhodes walked between the pods, her voice quiet. "These are not warriors, they are weapons crafted not for conquest, but for survival. When the galaxy finally came to silence us, we would rise not with fleets, but with fury, with bodies that do not break, and minds that do not forget." Mason looked at the pods and saw himself reflected again and again, not the man he had been, but the man they made. "We never wanted this," Mason said. "We only wanted peace, and peace required silence." Rhodes answered, "But silence failed. Now we speak." A proximity alert echoed through the bunker. A Council warship had arrived above the moon, undetected stealth class heavy weapons. Mason turned to Rhodes and said, "Then we start here." Rhodes nodded, then spoke into the command link. "Activate phase Omega." In space above the moon, the stars shimmered as dozens of dark shapes emerged, ships with no markings, no beacon signals, built from stolen tech and human will. Inside the Council warship, the crew shouted warnings as unknown vessels appeared behind them, flanking them without firing, yet their very presence sent a message. "You thought we were weak, now you know." We were waiting back at the station. Calrex stood before Selrun for a final time, his voice steady, his choice made. "I stand by what I did, because truth is not treason," Selyan replied coldly. "Then you will be exiled, stripped of all rank, and never again permitted to speak in Council." Calrex accepted the verdict and turned his back without bowing. He walked away, not broken, but transformed and above. Omega 9, the first blast fired a war, had begun not of dominance, but of awakening, and the galaxy would never be the same again. Tegi Pori Sci-Fi above Omega 9 burned red as the Council's warship began firing in precise, calculated bursts, meant to disable, not destroy. Their fear was still masked behind diplomacy, but their weapons told the truth. And Mason saw it clearly from the ground control station, buried deep under the surface of the moon. Commander Rhodes barked orders as the hidden fleet of stealth class Human vessels activated one by one, peeling away from the dark side of the moon. Like shadows made of fire and fury, they did not respond to hails. They did not declare intentions. They simply moved on board the lead stealth ship. Mason stepped onto the command deck, his body encased in adaptive armor, his skin already sinking with the suit's neural network, his breath even and controlled. But his heart knew the weight of what this moment meant. No more hiding, no more apologies for surviving. He turned to the pilot and said, "Lock weapons, prepare for contact." The pilot nodded silently, then activated the broadwave channel to all human ships. "This is Unit 1. You are green to engage all hostiles until retreat or surrender above." Then the Council ship hesitated, unsure whether to fire again or speak, but it was too late. The human fleet surged forward like a wave, without sound, without warning. They jammed the warship's sensors, blinded its defense systems, and targeted its power grid. Within seconds, a cascade of explosions rippled across its underbelly, forcing the vessel to fall. Back shields failing, Commander Rhodes watched from the surface, her expression unreadable, but her voice sharp. "They will send more," Mason responded. "Then we make this one count." Meanwhile, across the galaxy, the Council was in chaos. Reports flooded in that Earth had activated an illegal fleet, that a former Lazarus subject had declared resistance, that the moon Omega-9 was a base not listed in any alliance treaty, and now stood as a fortress of evolution. In the heart of the chaos, Calrex remained in his forced exile, confined to a diplomatic satellite, drifting in orbit around a forgotten star. But even in silence, he had not stopped working. His signal was weak, but he still had one tool, the truth. He opened his private channel and uploaded every file, every scan, every confession, and every clip of Mason standing against the fire, unbroken. He sent it to one person. Lorothy received it deep within the Council intelligence archives, where she had been moved for reassignment. She watched the footage with shaking hands and then made her choice. She copied the data and uploaded it to the public network of every allied planet. Within minutes, billions of beings saw Mason's scans, saw Project Lazarus, saw the lies that the Council tried to bury beneath fear and silence. Protests erupted across planet. Some called humans abominations. Others called them miracles. Council could no longer control the narrative on Omega-9. Mason stood beneath the fractured stars, his body aching from battle, his armor dented, but his will unbroken. He had faced their fear and their weapons, and stood still, and now the galaxy watched, not with mocking eyes, but with the gaze of those who must now question everything they believed. A medic rushed to his side, a young man shaken and wide-eyed. "Commander Mason, Dr. Calrex was injured protecting the human child during the escape from the Council station. We brought him here, but his condition is critical." Mason's eyes narrowed. "Take me to him in the med bay." Calrex lay motionless, his skin pale, his breathing shallow, burns across his chest from plasma fire, and deep wounds through his side. The machines were struggling to keep him stable. Mason looked down at the one who once laughed at human fragility, now broken because he chose to protect the very people he once ridiculed. He asked softly, "Can he be saved?" Medic shook his head. "Not by our means. His body is failing. We do not have the right match." Mason reached into the case beside him, pulled out a vial of his own blood. "Try this." The medic froze, confused. Mason repeated, "Try it." The blood was fed into Calrex's force slowly. His system began to respond, the cells inside Mason's blood recognizing trauma and beginning repair, despite the difference in biology, despite the barriers his body adapted even in death to preserve life. Hours passed and Calrex opened his eyes, barely conscious, his voice weak. "You were right," Mason replied. "You were brave." Calrex smiled faintly. "Then maybe we both were wrong about each other." Outside the med bay, human ships floated in silence, not to conquer, not to destroy, but to remind the galaxy that survival had never been weakness, it had been warning. And now that warning had become reality, the uprising was no longer a rebellion, it was evolution in motion, and no one could stop it now. Aridi MPTIO and LEGAC that never started officially was over before it began. Those ships still circled in factions, Still whispered the galaxy had seen what it was never meant to see, and no one could erase it. No decree could delete the footage. No council meeting could change the minds of billions on Omega 9. Beneath the scorched stars, Mason Briggs stood among rows of recovering soldiers, some wounded, some resting, all of them once forgotten prototypes of a project buried in the shadows but now standing in the light. They had not chosen to become legends. They had simply refused to decalrex. Sat nearby, no longer in the uniform of a High Council doctor, but dressed in the standard robes of a field medic, his movements slower, but his eyes sharper than before, his body healed with the help of Mason's blood, his perspective transformed by the very species he once mocked. A diplomatic shuttle landed at the far end of the base, its wings folding in as the engines cooled, a new delegation stepping out. They wore neither the robes of command nor the weapons of war, just the markings of those who came to listen. Sarun, the crystalline arbiter, stepped forward alone, its form humming gently under the new gravity, its face unreadable, but its posture no longer proud. Mason approached with steady steps, unarmed, unguarded. Behind him stood Rhodes Calrex, and a handful of humans and aliens who had stood through the Kawaselrun spoke first, its voice quiet like wind over glass. We made decisions based on fear and arrogance. We sought to control what we did not understand and silence what challenged our beliefs. We judged your biology and called it threat when it was only truth. Mason nodded slowly and said, we never wanted war, but we were never going to kneel for comfort either. Selrun extended a data crystal. This contains a full pardon for Dr. Calrex, restoration of all credentials, and an official invitation for Earth to take a permanent seat on the High Council. Calrex's eyes widened, but he said nothing. Mason took the crystal and said, Earth will answer, but we will not forget, not the silence, not the targeting, not the shame you tried to paint across our Servavalsalin lowered its head and said, nor should you. Later in the medical wing, Calrex walked through the halls, checking patients, human and alien, alike, his steps steady, his eyes kind, not the eyes of a superior, but of a man who now understood humility. He paused beside a young alien child, her arm in a brace, her eyes wide with fear. She whispered softly, are humans really monsters like the stories say? Calrex knelt beside her and said, no, not monsters, just misunderstood. Sometimes we fear what heals us because it hurts first. The child smiled weakly and nodded. In the strategy room, Rhodes reviewed reports incoming from other sectors. Rebellions in thought, not violence. Debates rising about human potential, alien limitations, interspecies genetics becoming the most researched field overnight. You realize, she said to Mason, this is just the beginning. Mason looked at the holographic star map and replied, we spent so long hiding because we thought they would fear us. We were right, but hiding made them forget we were still human. Now they see us, and they cannot unsee us. Rhodes asked, and what do we do now? Mason answered, something simple. We live. We let the next generation inherit something better than silence. Weeks passed, and Omega 9 became more than a bunker. It became a symbol. It was open to research alliances, medical exchange. Alien diplomats walked beside Lazarus veterans, unafraid of what they read. MPTION and legacy. Final, the moons of Omega 9 glowed with a soft light, as if the Tigu stars themselves had drawn closer to listen. In silence, the war fleets had returned to their sectors, and for the first time in decades, no council ship hovered above Earth in silent threat. Instead, the skies were watched by allies and messengers, and those who came not to conquer, but to learn. Mason Briggs stood at the edge of the observation platform, the wind from the open dome brushing against his face. His armor gone, replaced by a simple uniform with no rank, no medal, no mark to declare who he was, and yet everyone knew behind him. Calrex approached, his steps slow but sure, his once pale skin now bearing signs of human DNA woven gently into his recovery process. His body had begun to adapt, not fully but enough to live stronger longer, enough to understand what it meant to evolve through pain. They stood together without speaking for a while, just watching the horizon where Earth's blue shimmered far in the distance like a memory finally understood. Calrex finally broke the silence. and said I never thought I would envy a species I once ridiculed. Mason smiled softly without turning and said, and I never thought I would trust one that laughed at my blood. Calrex let out a quiet breath, then handed Mason a thin metal object shaped like a coin engraved with the symbol of the Council Medical Corps. Have been offered the position of interspecies biological ethics chair under your name under your file. They say I'm the only one qualified to speak on what it means to be human. Mason looked down at the coin for a long time and said, then make sure they listen this time. Elsewhere in the grand hall of the council, the seats once divided now stood in a circle, and at the head of it stood an empty chair marked Earth. It would not be filled by a warrior or a politician or a scientist. It would be filled by a voice that had survived, and a voice that had been silenced, and now spoke not with pride, but with purpose. Children on alien worlds began learning human biology in classrooms, not as curiosities but as companions in evolution. They studied not the strength of muscle, but the strength of healing, the power of recovery, the ability to rise again and again. In one quiet room aboard Omega-9, Lorith broadcasted the first message of the new alliance across every frequency, every corner of the galaxy. It was not a declaration of dominance nor a call to arms. It was a story of a doctor who laughed at human biology, a story of a soldier who said nothing but proved everything, a story of pain turned into power and silence turned into strength. As her voice echoed through satellites and ships and cities, the galaxy remembered that some things once seen cannot be unseen, and some truths once revealed become the foundation of tomorrow. Mason walked alone down the halls of the new research wing, where soldiers and civilians worked side by side, where alien children learned from human veterans, where Calrex gave lectures on cellular rebirth and adaptive regeneration. He paused at a memorial wall, etched with names not of the fallen, but of those who had risen again and again, not because they were built for war, but because they were built never to surrender. Rhodes joined him quietly, her eyes scanning the same names, and she said, do you think they would be proud? Mason replied, I think they never wanted to be remembered. They just wanted to be seen. The wind shifted and the stars above blinked like ancient eyes opening to something new, and across that vast galaxy fear gave way to curiosity, arrogance gave way to respect, and what began as laughter ended in legacy, because in the end humanity was never fragile, it was waiting.